Hello, everyone. My name is Vika Bell Robinson, and I serve as the Director of Residence Life at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. And I also serve as a Chair-elect for the Public Policy Advisory Committee for Hawaii. And I want to welcome you to our interactive session today on how campuses experience security. So we're going to get started here with some introductions of our panelists. But before we do, I just want to go over a few notes about today's session. So this is not a traditional webinar. This is a conversation-based experience, and we want you to have the opportunity to participate in this conversational-based experience. You'll be able to do that by putting questions or comments in the chat feature if you have any questions or comments. And when you do that, we ask that you share your name, position, and institution, and in addition to your comment. And in the meantime, feel free to let us know that you're here by putting your institution into the chat right now. So thanks for being here. We're going to get started with some introductions of our panelists today. And so I will ask our panelists to introduce themselves, share their title, their institution, and then their security style. And so whether they are campus police operation or a campus safety operation. And we do have representatives from both sort of law enforcement security type offices, as well as from traditional housing and residence life experiences, because we want to really show the breadth of the perspectives of both sort of units. So campus security is a big issue on our campuses, and with all of the communication, media coverage around policing in general, and then colleges and universities in general, we thought it would be good to have some time to talk about this topic. And not just talk in sort of our own housing and residence life circles, but to talk broadly with folks who are on the front line of this work. So I'm gonna ask in just sort of the order that I see you all, if you'll introduce yourselves, and I'll ask Mike Zagadlo to go first.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mike Zagadlo. I'm the Chief of Police at Lewis University, which is in Romeoville, Illinois, about 35 miles southwest of Chicago. And we have a fairly new, we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary police department here.
Mike, thanks for going first. Also, I forgot to ask you to say one thing you enjoy about your position and one thing you think is misunderstood.
I have the luxury of working at a small department, so I'm kind of what you'd call a working chief. I like that I get a lot of frontline contact with students and community members. It's not weird for me to go out on a call for service. I don't wear this just to look cool. I'm part of the patrol staff here. And I think one of the things that's kind of misunderstood about public safety and campus public safety in general is the complexity of the role. It's really challenging, and there are a lot of elements to it. We're not just the guys who write you parking tickets or show up at your loud party complaint, but you know, we're counselors and plumbers and auto mechanics and all kinds of other things all at the same time. So I think some of our community members don't really have a grasp on maybe how complex the job really is.
Thank you, Mike. Nick, can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Nick Raffanello, he, him, his pronouns. I am the Executive Director for Housing and Dining at the University of Northern Iowa. We have a police operation on our campus. One thing I enjoy about my position, I'm only 5 months into the Executive Director role, so just about everything right now, because it's still all new and exciting. Excuse me. One thing misunderstood, the delicate balance of trying to manage the day-to-day with also planning for 5 and 10 years out. That's what I think is misunderstood, and how complex that duality can be.
Thanks, Nick. Lewis?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lewis Aikens. I'm the new Vice President of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness at Ivy Tech Community College. We are a system of 19 campuses throughout the state. I'm based in Indy, and I've only been here less than 4 months. We do not have housing on our campus, so I'm going to speak from the perspective of where I just came from, which is Idaho State, and I was there for 6 years, which is a PWI, and then Oakwood U in Huntsville, Alabama, and I was there for almost 9 years. And we were a sworn agency at Idaho State. We were none sworn. One of the things that I like to do is collaborate. I like to collaborate across campus. I always feel that if you work alone, you will end up standing alone. And so I don't like standing by myself. I like to make sure I have people surrounding me, and my 6 brain cells coupled with the brain cells of maybe 4 other people, we can get a whole lot more done. So I don't like to make decisions for others if there are other partners that I really need to talk to first. One of the things that I feel that we are misunderstood about, kind of like going back into what the chief just said, people do not understand the magnitude of the responsibilities we have. I mean, for my team here, we are environmental health and safety, we're Clery, we are risk management, emergency management. So that's why I tend to use the term public safety officers, because we're more than just locking up doors, shaking the door handles, logging folks in. And so that's what I think, is that we are just misunderstood in terms of what we do.
Thank you. Cliff.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cliff Simon. My pronouns are in a he, him series. I serve as the Residence Hall Director at Cornell University, which is located in Ithaca, New York. And I supervise a first-year community that has approximately 460 students. Our security style on campus is police. We do have a police department that has multiple different levels of officers and support staff. So that's our style there. In terms of my position at Cornell, I think, let's see, something that's misunderstood personally, and I think some other people in this room can probably understand, is because of our closeness to our communities, we might be assumed as students. And sometimes, you know, because of our closeness to our communities, that can create roadblocks to how we show up in certain spaces, and specifically in crisis response and management. Something that I enjoy in my position is a large focus of a sense of belonging, whether you're a staff member or student, foundationally and structurally within our mission and you know, our values departmentally and division-wise. Sense of belonging is at the top notch of our values. So that's my perspective. Thank you.
Thanks, Cliff. Alarie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alarie Tersch. I am the Associate Dean for Students at Pace University, the Pleasantville campus. I took on this role about 1 year ago. We went through a slight restructure in the Division of Student Affairs. And previous to that at Pace, I was Assistant Dean and Director of Residential Life and Housing. And I did that role all on my own for six years. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And we have Pace security. We do not have police on campus, and maybe slightly different than some other folks. So some of our security staff actually work for Pace University. We have coordinators and assistant directors and a director and an executive director. And then the rest of the security staff are all hired guards. So they're contract guards, I should say, sorry. And so we hire them through a contract company. And so they change over quite often. You know, they find a different company to work for. Sometimes I hear our executive director say it's kind of nice to have contract guards because when they do something wrong, it's easy to say, let's remove that person from our contract. So that's sometimes a nice situation when we have an issue with a guard, which we don't often. I would say that the most misunderstood thing about both of the positions I'm in is that I'm like this, and I'll put this in quotes, the scary person, right? The RAs and the RDs used to think that I was the one who could fire them if I wanted to on a whim. And I never fired a single person here at Pace. And, you know, we have those hard conversations with students often, but I don't hide behind my title. Like generally speaking, everyone just calls me Alarie. And I prefer that rather than Dean Alarie or Dean Tersch. And I think what I enjoy most about my position is the interactions that I have with faculty, staff, and students alike, to be honest. And for students specifically, I really love having those hard conversations with students about, you know, what's going on with them and how we can help them as a division. And when I was in Res Life, what we could do to help them in Res Life. So that's who I am.
Thanks, Alarie. Kimberly.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kimberly Spears McNatt, and I am the Chief of Police for the Ohio State University, Columbus, Ohio. We do have a Department of Public Safety, which consists of the Police Division and Security Services, but I am responsible for the Police Division. One of the things that I enjoy about my job is that I am an OSU graduate. And so being on campus my entire career, actually growing up, and there's no 2 days the same. Being able to engage with the student, staff, and faculty members, I really enjoy that. And I think one of the things that's really misunderstood about my role or the division is that where our jurisdiction lies. Sometimes people may not understand that our jurisdiction is primarily on campus, but sometimes people seem to think that I have responsibility in the entire city.
I can't see a lot of the audience, but I just know that people were like, yeah, you're like, Columbus is a big place, and OSU is big, but it's not as big as Columbus. And you're like, no, where did this happen? So thank you, Kimberly. Okay, so we have, just to give folks an idea of how our session is going to work today, we'll spend some time in this group. I have some prepared questions for the panelists that have introduced themselves, and we'll also invite your questions in the chat box for sure. And then we're going to spend about 20 or so minutes doing that, and then we're going to break up into smaller groups depending on your campus current design, or just if you want to learn about what it might be like on a campus that isn't exactly like your campus. So, and we'll break up into discussions, and there's some questions that can happen in some smaller groups, and then we'll come back together and do a closing just to give everyone an idea of how this is going to happen. So let me just see if there's any questions in the chat. There's not. So we'll start for our panelists that work in campus security or with campus police. My question for you is, in an ideal situation, what type of partnership would you like to see with the Housing and Residence Life team? You can go in whatever order you'd like.
I can go. Okay. The thing that I really like to see and I really cherish is when there is a very strong partnership and the roles are clearly defined. And I think that is so critical. Just the small things. For instance, who is responsible for what? If we have an intoxicated student that comes in at 2 a.m. in the morning, and we see them, who is responsible for doing a watch on that student? It's my staff, is it the housing staff? Just the simple things like a notification process. If something happens in housing that my officers are dealing with, I don't think it's my responsibility to notify someone in the housing chain, such as the VP. But that has often come to me and they said, well, why didn't you text me, Lewis, to let me know that, well, this is your area. I assume that your people will bump this up to you. So just knowing who does what, because once things go south, then it's really too late to try to sort that out.
So Vika, this is Kimberly. I will go next. I could imagine a better situation that we have here at Ohio State University, working with our residence life, all staff and student life, that the relationship that we have is phenomenal, where any of their staff members can call me anytime of day or night. I can reach out to them to troubleshoot, and we collaborate, we communicate. And so we have the ideal relationship where that communication is constantly going back and forth, understanding that if there's something going on that's related to that student, that's the primary focus, getting them the help or their resources or their services. So I personally think I have the ideal relationship.
I've had kind of the unique experience of having worked in residence life before I came into a public safety career. I was a housing director at two different institutions, one university, one college. So like my folks in the police department know I have a kind of a bias towards our friends in residence life. And we really, I tell the cops that, the RAs are fellow first responders as far as we're concerned. Because when something's going haywire at 3 o'clock in the morning, the first two people that are going to show up are the RA and the police officer. So it's really important for me have those same kind of themes of communication and collaboration that Lewis and Kim mentioned. But, we really push co-training, doing scenario-based training together so that, those of us who worked in police work before, when you have a good beat partner and you kind of know their moves and you can predict their moves and kind of know their limitations, that is really helpful when you're doing in-progress response stuff at 3 o'clock in the morning, that we know what the RA's limitations are and capabilities, and they know what our limitations and capabilities are, and that we've trained on that together. And that, in real-time scenario-based training, that's been really helpful for us to kind of promote that collaboration across the department.
It's actually a really good idea to think about how we can train with each other. And, Miami is a bit larger than Lewis, but I think that there's still some opportunities for us to maybe do some training with our police department. So thanks. Thank you all for answering, and thanks for that idea. For our panelists who work in housing and residence life, how have you been able to develop a productive relationship with your partners in campus safety or campus police?
I'd be happy to start. Alarie again, hi. So I think coming into this position, when I was the director of residential life and housing, the person that was in the position before me had started the residential life and housing program here at PACE. And she was the only director that they had known before I came in. So the first thing I had to do coming into this new role 8 years ago was to prove that I knew what I was doing. I had a residence life background, and then I was in student activities for 8 years, and then I got back into residential life, which everyone says was the dumbest thing I ever did. Why would you go back into residence life? Because I love it. And so I had to prove my worth, right? I had come in as a new person. Nobody knew who I was. Nobody had heard of me in this area. And so I had to get the executive director of safety and security to understand that I knew what I was doing. I knew what I was talking about, and that the staff that were working with me also knew what they were doing and what they were talking about. At that time that I was hired, we also transitioned from having all grad RDs to having almost all full-time professional RDs. And so that was a very big shift for us. And we had to get the security staff to understand that these were full-time professionals who this is what they wanted to do with their life, right? Work with college students. And so once we sort of got that set and established, then I decided that I need to have meetings with security. It was, for me, better to set up scheduled meetings, weekly or bi-weekly meetings, and talk about the things that had happened that week and that we were expecting to happen next week, rather than wait until something happened and it didn't go the way we wanted it to, and then have to have that conversation. It was much easier to say, okay, this is where we are right now, and this is where we're moving. And so he was a little hesitant at first to have those meetings, but I convinced him that it was okay to come to my office, or I could go to his office, and we met for an hour most of the time it was every other week, because that's what both of our schedules allowed. And in those meetings, I created agendas. And people often said, it seems like you're doing his work, right? You're creating the agendas. You're right. I wrote the minutes from our meetings, and I did minutes, and I did action items, because I learned quickly that while our executive director for safety and security is a wonderful individual, he's an ex-police officer, administrative detail is not his strong point, right? And so he would sit and talk to me in these meetings and not take notes of what we were talking about or what I had asked for him to do. And that would just get me really angry, to be very honest, and frustrated. And so I learned pretty quickly, I'm going to take notes during these meetings, write in the Microsoft Outlook invite and put the action items and who was in charge of them. Most of them were the director of safety and security in charge of following up on the things that I needed followed up on. But that gave him the reminder, right? That it was in the notes. He could go back and check. Sometimes he didn't go back and check until the day before we were going to meet again, but at least he did. And on that day, he would check mark the boxes for me to make sure that I knew he was doing what we both needed him to do. And I always made sure to follow up. So I know it might seem like it's a little bit extra and a little bit over the top, but that's what I found to work really well for us. The one other thing I just wanted to bring up was it's really hard to have a great working relationship with safety and security if you don't know who they are and they don't know who we are, right? And as I said before, some of our security, or almost all of our security officers, are contract guards. And so they're hourly staff and we only have so much of a budget. And so I'd say, well, let's bring in all the guards for training. And I was often told, well, we can't do that because we can't bring in extra people. And then who's going to cover the night shift? And so we started doing some of that training at night. We started having our Res Life staff go and do rounds every now and again with security, a more collaborative relationship. And then they got to know our faces and we got to know their faces. We also did something where we took all of the security guards' pictures and put it in our RD duty manual so that when they were responding to an incident, they could real quick look at that manual, which they could pull up on their phone if they wanted, and identify who that guard was, because our guards didn't always wear name tags. They do now, but they didn't always used to. So it's just a couple of little things that we did.
Just to follow up on Alarie's point here, I think on the same track that we have to humanize the people that we work with, right? I think back as a student and as a paraprofessional member and now a professional member at my previous institutions, I honestly, being brave here, saw and assumed like police presence as a strong negative presence, right? Because of the power and the authority that they have, right? I'm thinking about like, I'm a New York City kid who had some bad experiences, went to a PWI institution where there were only like white officers, right? So I came in with all these preconceived notions and had like this negative like idea, right? And then I became an RA and I became an RG, and now again, as a professional, and being able to work on the back end with officers, I've had to challenge myself and relearn how to have relationships with officers, right? And I can confidently say that I no longer have like this pessimistic, like angry relationship towards officers because of how closely we work with them within residence life. And so how were we able to like formulate, how was I able to like rethink and reshape my thinking? I think it was a product of a foundation and an understanding of respect, right? As soon as I was able to respect the officers and they respected me in terms of our positions, and like Lewis talked about, like understanding like what our roles are in situation that we're responding to in crisis, that created an atmosphere to have a productive relationship. And again, that foundation comes with an understanding of respect. And that just makes everyone's life a lot easier in a crisis, right? Like if I know what you're doing, you know what I'm doing, and I got your back and you got my back, right? That creates some sort of like unity, right? Especially when we're going into these situations where a student is in crisis, and our priority is not to have beef with each other, right? And our priority is to communicate and get the student support. So that's my perspective.
So the only thing I'd add is a little bit different. When I was in graduate school at Indiana University and then worked there full time, Indiana University has its own police academy. And we actually had part-time officers that were students going through the police academy, living in our residence halls. And so they were part of our leadership team. They were part of our on-call rounds. They would sit behind the desk in uniform. That was one of my requirements, that they couldn't be behind the desk unless they were in uniform. But then they would get to know and interact. And going off of your point, Cliff, is they got to interact with our students. And so they were in uniform, armed police officers, but they were interacting with our students behind the desk, issuing them a package, doing, hanging out with the RAs, getting to know them. And I think that really shaped the foundation I had of the unique role and responsibility police can have within the residential system, and building those relationships and creating a sense of community. They add to that community and how they can really do that in a productive way. Some of the ways that we've done it, in my career, has really been building those relationships and finding time to recognize we both have jobs to do. And so if we can keep student success and student support at the core of what we're doing and how we're responding, we all have the same goal in mind. And so how do we keep that? And that's just through the conversations, those meetings. And like you said, getting to know the officers. Our RAs are trained at UNI here that they're probably not going to get all the information they need right away. But our police officers are trained that they need to hold back once the situation is done and brief the RAs so the RAs can submit their report. It's that mutual understanding that they both have something to report and a job to do, and really, but it's taken time to build that relationship and get everyone to understand that if we keep the student at the core of it, that we will be successful in that relationship. And it's worked out so far. So I'm pretty happy with it. And Kimberly, I'm going to challenge you. I would put our relationship with our police department and my relationship with our chief up against anyone. So you're on.
Well, that's folks want to be a part of that challenge, right? Like, yeah, mine is better than yours. That is the kind of conversation that is why we're having a session. That's what we're going for. But yes, mutual respect and having an understanding of each other's responsibilities is good. And I do think that there can be, we all come to this work with history, with experiences, and we lay that on top of whatever the present is. And particularly around policing, there might be some history. And so really trying to give whoever you're working with, whether it's a chief or an officer, whatever, the benefit of the doubt, the opportunity to share their story with you, I think is a really important part of that. And Alarie, we just had a chief change here at Miami, and I meet weekly with the chief, and it's life-changing. So if you're on a campus where you aren't doing that, I recommend that you do that. It certainly helps to just have regular conversation. We don't meet for an hour though. We only meet for about 20 minutes, but we
didn't always meet for an hour. Some weeks it was 20 minutes. Some weeks it was an hour and a half. Some weeks the meetings ended very well, smiling. Everybody went about their business. Some weeks the meetings ended with the door slamming and some not so nice words, and then cookies were sent later.
Cookies were sent later. Cookies.
Yeah. So it was not always peaches and cream, and it never will be, right? We have different perspectives on how things should be handled. And, I have my levels of experience and he has his levels of experience. And so sometimes we just have to talk through that. And sometimes that talking gets a little loud, but I think why we could always come back together in the end, like for the next week, let's say, is that we had that foundation built before anything would get really blown up out of proportion. And so we always, in the end, respected each other's opinions. Sometimes we didn't like the opinion, but we always respected it. And I think that's really the core of the relationship.
Yes, indeed. We had some vandalism on our campus recently, and it's easy when you're the responding officer to be like, what is going on in these halls? And it's also easy when you're the responding RA to be like, why can't the police do anything? And I was meeting with our chief, and I was like, listen, we're not the enemy. The vandals, like, that's who we should be mad at. No one did anything wrong. It's the vandals that we need to focus on. And so everyone's like, oh yeah, that's true. That's true. No one wants destruction in the residence halls. So we have a question from Mark in the chat box. And so I'll go ahead and read that. And then the question, and then people can respond. And this might be actually a question. It looks like maybe it's a question for other folks in the audience. And so let's go ahead and read the question. Do you have a community service officer program at your institution? If yes, how does it work with the University Police and Housing? So this is from Mark Edmond at Florida Atlantic University. Thanks, Mark, for the question. So I'll throw that to the panelists, but also invite folks who are participating to answer in the chat as well. Anybody have a community service officer program at your institution? And if so, how does that interact with your University Police and Housing?
It kind of depends on what Mark means by a community service officer. So we have 10 sworn police officers in our department. I know Chief Kim is probably like, wow, that's really small. We have 10 sworn officers in our department. And then we have 9, what we call campus safety officers, and they mirror what a municipal community service officer would look like. And they do service calls like vehicle jump starts or door unlocks in the residence halls and that kind of thing. They also double dip as dispatchers. So our community service officers also serve as dispatchers. So our staff is actually kind of 50-50 split between sworn certified cops with guns and arrest power, and then civilian campus safety officers, which mirror what a traditional municipality would see as a community service officer. But I don't know if that's what Mark is asking about.
Mark, is that what you were asking about? Did that help?
That is correct. Thank you. I was getting ready to respond here. Thank you, Chief. Yes, we do have a community service officer here at FEU. I am the coordinator for safety education, and my role is a dual position where I do report to the captain in the police department and also housing and residential education, where I have 5 community service officers under the police department and 28 community service officers in housing, where we work closely together to bridge both departments together in how we serve our students here on campus.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Okay, so I think at this time, what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and split into smaller groups to give you an opportunity to have some more direct conversation about campus types and security types. And so I think Holly from the central office is going to set up breakout rooms. So the first breakout room is going to be if you're interested in looking at or learning about or having discussions around if it's a police operation. And then the second room is going to be a campus safety operation. So sort of the difference between sworn police officers with, to quote Mike, arresting power, and then other campus safety security officers. So thank you, Holly, for putting that in the chat. So we'll invite you to choose one of these rooms. Again, an opportunity to have some smaller discussion. We want to invite participants to ask questions, unmute your camera if that's something you feel like comfortable doing, and engage in a conversation in these smaller groups. We'll spend probably about 20 minutes or so in those smaller groups, and then we'll come back. So you can go ahead and choose. I think there'll be, yes. I don't know. Holly, do you want to explain how this works?
Yeah, you should get a pop-up that allows you to basically select the room that you want to go into, and then you head that way. So I see people are figuring that out. Perfect.
Thank you, Holly.
Sure.
Kimberly, do you want me to assign you to the police ops? Oh, you're muted.
Yes, I didn't see anything pop up on my screen.
Okay, I'll assign you.
Okay, thank you.
I think our police operations room is still wrapping up, so they'll populate the screen here in a minute. Y'all all popped right in.
We know how to follow directions.
That's right. We are compliant.
That's right, Lewis.
Well, I think we have everyone back. I hope that those small conversations were helpful and you had an opportunity to get some of your questions answered. We're just about at the end of time. And so I'm just going to ask our panelists to share sort of any final words. First, before I do that, are there any questions from the audience that someone would like to maybe put in the chat, or there's plenty of people still sort of picture unmuted, or you can go ahead and unmute. Any final questions before we transition to our closing?
Hello, my name is Stacey Casanova. I work in Pace University alongside Benny and Alarie. I don't really have a question rather than a statement. I found this roundtable to be really helpful. I am coming back to Res Life after I think, a 5-6 year break. So it was really good to hear multiple sides, and I felt that this was very informative too, because sometimes, you know, you need to hear that other side when you weren't the resident. So I just wanted to thank everyone for being so open and honest and sharing.
Thank you, Dacier. And certainly Dacier's appreciation is, I'm sure, echoed by certainly myself and then other folks on the call. We can't thank our panelists enough for taking time out of your busy schedules to spend time with us and share your perspectives. Are there any final comments from the panelists? Words of advice, words of wisdom, anything you want to leave folks with? It looks like, yes, Alarie. I was like, Alarie is nodding, so.
I am ready. I am always ready to speak, unfortunate. So I think my words of wisdom, that the first thing is, if you're working in a system that is maybe not working for you, it's good to try to implement change, but to remember that change doesn't happen overnight, right? It's not like today it's this way and tomorrow everyone's going to have a different mindset. It takes time, right? It takes a long time sometimes. Sometimes it takes a couple months, sometimes it takes a couple years, but you can't stop. You have to push forward for what you think is right in every situation. And that's for the safety and security, that's for the police, that's for the res life folks, everybody, I think. And the other piece of advice I would have is that when you're in the middle of working with a security officer or a police officer in a potentially heated situation, and maybe they're not doing things exactly the way you would love for them to do them, in the middle of the heated situation is not necessarily the best time to have that conversation, right? Offer them the little grace, say, just take a step back, as long as no one's being abused or, you know, degraded. Let them go about what they think is the right thing to do, and then talk to them the next day about it. Give them a little bit of space in between it. And I say giving them a little space gives them a little bit of grace, right? To really sit and think about what they did. Because as I said earlier, no one is perfect. None of us on any of these calls are perfect. And I think we all have something to learn. And you might think, oh, they did that terribly. And they might be able to very easily explain why they did that, right? What their background is and why they handled it in such a situation. They might have known that student from a different place than you did, in a different space than you possibly did. And so I think that that's really important. And that in wrapping up this thought, grace and communication, I think, are the two biggest keys to making sure that everyone has positive working relationships moving forward.
Thanks, Alarie. Would anybody else like to share?
A really quick key to success. In terms of rebuilding relationships or creating that foundation of respect, I think it's super important to understand how diversity and inclusion, but also people's identities, particularly those with marginalized identities, perceive police presence, right? And the way that it intersects with social media, the way it intersects with the news, and what information is exposed to individuals, to understand that there are some trauma, that there are some pieces of trauma and some scabs and some wounds that are in a process of being mended, and that we all have the power, right, to create a community of respect, so we can both work with each other and learn with each other, particularly with those from marginalized communities and identities during this COVID time too. Thank you.
Thanks, Cliff. Would anyone else like to share?
I just think of, Vika, that we really have to continue to work hand in hand. We may not always agree. I mean, I'm a very strong chief. I'm gonna, work, I know my job, and most of the chiefs that I know their jobs very, very well. And, and so it's a matter of collaborating with those in res life who know their jobs very well and coming up with joint solutions without anyone necessarily being having a dominant role, but just that we have a mutual appreciation. And, that's how I see it, working hand in hand.
Thanks, Louis. There's a resource in the chat, so feel free to look at that chat box and tap into that resource. I want to say that, first of all, thank you to our panelists for being here. Thank you to our support in the Kuhuai office for helping us put on this webinar. I had the opportunity to coach youth baseball, and I was also a youth baseball player. And one of the things that has stayed with me throughout all of my years and now as an adult is that my coach would always say, your first step is back. So if you can imagine with me, you're in the outfield or maybe you're in the infield and the ball gets hit and you want to run up to it because you want to catch the ball, but you can't quite judge what is actually happening if you don't take a step back. And so sometimes when we're in these situations where something has happened, right? Rare is it for us to encounter campus safety or housing residents, life staff together and something has not happened. We have those moments in training and, socials or whatever, but most of the time something has happened and it's easy to run towards the ball and to make all sorts of decisions that are not correct because our first step should really be back, that we need to take it as much perspective as possible, and then we can work on handling the ball correctly. So as we prepare to part ways, I want to again thank our panelists. Panelists, it's going to feel like a very abrupt ending. So know that we appreciate you, and I'm not, we're not going to be able to linger and say, oh, how'd that go or whatever, but thank you so much. And thank you participants for engaging in today. And I just encourage you as we part ways to remember that your first step should always be back. And then we can handle all situations together. So thanks everyone and have a great day.
Thank you.